Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research, and their experiences. So, put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hi, thank you very much for coming on to the Sociology Show podcast. Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Lauren Doyle. I work at the University of Sunderland. So at the moment I am a part-time PhD student, around about 3 out of 6 years the way through, so we're halfway. But I also work as an academic tutor, so lecturing and running seminars, one-to-one tuition with students. But my PhD project is very much focusing on investigating the impact of social media on youth mental health, focusing on lived experience, online diet culture and relationships with body and nutrition within that. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you. Let's get stuck into that, talking about social media then. So is there a particular age group that you're focusing on?
Yeah, at the moment, I'm focusing on sort of 18 to 30-year-olds. The reason for that, sort of because of ethical approval and ease for the sake of a PhD project. But my working background has always has only sort of moved into youth for the last couple of years of my career in the field. So before I moved to start working at the university partway through my PhD, I had around about 6 to 7 years in practice, working within psychiatric hospitals, within the community, within the prison environment, the schools. So a bit of a mixed bag in terms of mental health. And I always found that if you were trying to look for research to back up your practice when it came to social media use and the link between social media and, say, anxiety and depression, for example, or communication skills, there was a lot of focus on 11 to 25-year-olds and not necessarily too much focus on that age group beyond, who have grown up with social media like myself for the majority of their teenage years, and sort of the longer term effects of that and how that might have shaped their earlier adult years.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that 18 to 30, because there's kind of a cusp there that at the lower end they will have lived their entire life with social media, and the ones at the top end have probably had a little bit of time when it wasn't such a big thing, so they've kind of experienced both angles of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I fall within that age bracket, and a key part of that is the lived experience element of the theoretical framework I'm using. So, a huge part of the theory that I adopt is that the researcher or the academic tends to have lived experience that they kind of work collaboratively with participants to talk about. So, I'm 26, so I've had that sort of early teenage years of where you maybe had MySpace or a BlackBerry phone or something like that, an early stage smartphone. But I've also had my later teenage years and my university years massively shaped by this boom in social media. So the likes of your Facebook, your Instagram, Snapchat, newer forums for conversation and for sharing images of your life. So I've kind of got that double-edged sword, I suppose, for that older end of the age bracket.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like you said, that we don't know the long-term effects. So those that have lived their whole life with it, they're kind of the guinea pigs, aren't they? We don't really know what the effect is, and, well, we won't know for several years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like I said, research is booming in this area at the minute, and interest in social media and in online harms because of the government shaping the online safety bill as we speak. There's a lot of interest in this area. So since I started my PhD, I have seen a lot more publications looking at social media impact on young people, on adults, but not so much on the influence over what would be known in medical terms as disordered eating patterns or body image concerns around anxiety. So I would like to think that now the government are working agendas around online safety and around supporting the obesity strategy and supporting use of social media in different publications that they've been putting out over the past year or so. I would like to think we'd see some kind of change in knowing what those longer term effects might look like, but I do think we're a few years off that yet.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you, in terms of looking at social media, is the overwhelming evidence that it has more negative effects than positive on the individual user?
I mean, to be honest, I had a conversation just like this with my supervisors a couple of weeks, well, probably about 3-4 weeks ago now. And I came into this project because of my own negative experiences of social media on my previous eating disorder. I came into this project thinking, yes, it'll be predominantly negative. This is something we need to tackle. And actually, as I'm getting further into the project and into the very early stages of data collection, but just conversations I have with colleagues, having conversations like we are having now, or even with my friends, I'm finding that it's not necessarily as negative as what I might have initially assumed. Yeah. So I'm kind of taking a bit of a different approach now to saying, well, actually, just what is your experience rather than how has this negatively shaped your life or has this had a negative impact on your life? Just let's talk about why you use social media or what you tend to see on social media and have a bit more of a conversation about general experience rather than just impact.
Yeah, the reason I ask is being older myself, working with students of 16, 17, 18, I have concerns over social media, internet usage, addiction and so on. And quite often I get the feeling they probably roll their eyes at me and say, well, it's not part of your generation. Do you know what I mean? I just wondered if a lot of the research is conducted by people that perhaps don't use it or understand it in the same way that young people use it themselves.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a really topical area when you've got I don't know if you've seen on Netflix The Social Dilemma.
Yes, I have, yeah.
Yeah, so when that was published a couple of years ago, I think it was 2020 possibly, and you have members of staff who worked for the likes of Google and the likes of Twitter, Facebook, who say that actually these platforms may not necessarily be fit for purpose or they're designed to be addictive. Their business models and their algorithms are designed to be addictive and to hook their users. Very similar language to kind of drug and alcohol use or substance misuse, isn't it, using the word user? But they're designed in that way. So many would argue that actually that this could have, whether we recognise it or not, social media use could have major negative impacts on our life, but I think it depends on the way we use it.
Yes, absolutely. Just as you were saying that, it just came into my mind. I went to the theatre to watch a show, and there was I'm going to stereotype here. There was a teenager sat in front of me who was scrolling through TikTok, and he actually scrolled through it for the entire 2 hours.
Wow!
And it was frustrating me because it was in the corner of my eye, do you know what I mean? But what I was really intrigued by is that the TikToks are obviously designed at a perfect length, which kind of gives you a little adrenaline burst that you want to then watch the next one and the next one. So the algorithms of what's the perfect length video to keep you hooked and to watch more, as you say, is well thought out and planned by the makers of the platforms in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I engage regularly try and engage with different social media platforms, so I'm kind of up to date for the sake of my PhD. But one particular podcast I listen to is The Diary of a CEO by Stephen Bartlett, and he has various businesses that engage with social media, and you hear him and some of his guests talking about the intention even behind the those who have big followings on these platforms, not only does the business model have a particular design to keep it addictive, but those who are really successful in having big followings and gaining quite a lot of money from using these applications or these forums, they know exactly what type of content they need to put onto different platforms to make sure that their engagement is high. So they know with the likes of TikTok, you have maybe 30 seconds to really grip someone and get some information across, or sell a product, or sell your business. Whereas the likes of Instagram, it's about the imagery in front of you and making it eye-catching. And LinkedIn would be more of a professional forum, so that they know what type of buzzwords to use and the way to shape their content to keep their engagement high, to make their following successful in line with these business models. It's quite fascinating, really, but it's very very technical, and I'm not very technology savvy.
I wonder if this is similar to what you found, Lauren, because, I teach a large number of 16 to 18-year-olds, and we teach the topic of media and globalisation, and many of them are aware that they're not blinded to that. They know full well that the apps or the platforms are there to make them addictive, but they still use them. And I find that really interesting, because many of the students kind of frustrate themselves that they are aware they're addicted. They know what's being done, but they're still falling into the trap or the manipulation.
Yeah, definitely. You hear the term falling down or going down the rabbit hole, don't you? Where they're just, like you say, just scrolling for hours. And I have that conversation with some of my students, as well as obviously some of the people I've spoken to in line with my research. It is a case of, I got I went on to TikTok and, 2 hours passed and I'd wasted 2 hours and got nothing done. Whereas myself, I know that I wouldn't have the likes of TikTok for that reason, because I would end up, like you say, kind of hooked and falling down that rabbit hole. So there's that distance for me. Whereas, like you say, some students you might have that conversation with, they're fully aware of the amount of time that they potentially waste on social media, that they might see it as a waste. But they still use it, and they still have it downloaded on their smartphone at the end of the arm most hours of the day.
Yeah. One of mine made a very good point that he stated that young people are often criticised for their constant use of being on their phone or on social media. But he said, surely the people that make the apps in the first place are older. So it's the older generation who are guilty of making the app to get the young person addicted in the first place. Like your analogy of it's the drug dealer and the drug user, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it'll be a couple of months away, but I've put an idea forward for a workshop at the university sometime soon around this, very similar to that actually, in terms of we sort of demonise the constant use of social media, and it tends to be linked to younger people because they are the bigger demographic who are seen to use social media or be on their phones for more hours of the day. And I know that I've always heard conversations, again, stereotyping, but tending to be from older generations, that say, these young people using social media all the time are always texting each other instead of just having a good phone call. They won't be able to communicate properly. They won't be able to write full sentences. It's impacting the way that students can send professional emails. I hear this quite often, but in a quote-unquote post-COVID world, we're still in a state where we're constantly promoting virtual communication. So we're constantly promoting people to work online or promoting students to engage with online content. But pre-COVID, we did nothing but demonise young people and students for being online all the time. So it's a bit of a culture shift in terms of the way that we see online use.
Yeah, it's also doesn't allow for the fact that kind of language and interaction adapts and changes over time as well, doesn't it? The formality of how you'd write a letter in the 1940s, that changed anyway. So, if messages are shorter or more emoji based, is that not just the development of language as opposed to losing tradition?
Yeah, absolutely. Because like you say, we change the way we express things all of the time. So even down to what was an acceptable kind of expression of speech 20, 30 years ago may not be as acceptable now. So we adapt not just how we communicate, but what we see as that we should be communicating and what we shouldn't.
Yeah, I agree with that. Students will write an email to me that will say hi and then ask me a question. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, that might have been inappropriate. You'd put "Dear Sir" or something. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, even that does adapt and change. And the area that I was really interested in was you were saying about the concerns to do with image, appearance, and mental health attached to that. And you also mentioned about diets and eating disorders as well. So I'm just going to speak from an outsider looking in, but it does seem to be that social media is having a significant impact on individuals' concerns about their looks, their appearance, aging, etc.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that, again, from my own experience, of kind of my own lived experience in my teenage years and most of my 20s, I know that for me, seeing very filtered photos on social media, following certain what we call influencers online who seem to have this very idealistic lifestyle and idealistic body that is promoted by the mass media and always has been, of how a woman should look, how a man should look, which of course changes over time alongside the way that, like we say, we express ourselves, we communicate. Our lives and our expectations are always changing. But for me, I know that social media is sometimes set quite unrealistic goals for how I have wanted to look as a woman. So say if in my younger years when I was dieting, I would say, well, I want to look like her and that is my goal. Set my phone screen to be a particular person or follow certain accounts on social media. And I would see it as a motivation. But actually, as social media has developed and as filtering applications on our phones have also developed, we now see that a lot of these images that young people strive to look like online are filtered and they're very unrealistic. We've also seen a huge rise over the past 10 years in cosmetic surgery and the promotion of cosmetic surgery online, how it's potentially easier to get, lip fillers, face fillers than it would have been 10 years ago. So an area that I've found when looking at sort of literature and existing research around this has been the new diagnosis of something called Snapchat dysmorphia. And I mean, there's a whole other argument that I could talk all day about in terms of how we are living in a world where we constantly medicalise behaviour to be able to give people diagnoses, but that's a whole other talk. But there was a group of surgeons, plastic surgeons in London who saw what they reported in 2018 is an influx of potential patients coming to them with either photos of other people that they saw on Instagram or Snapchat or selfies they took of themselves on Snapchat with a filter on their face and went to the plastic surgeon and said, okay, that's how I want you to make me look. And they saw an influx of patients doing this, which then saw them create the term and the diagnosis of Snapchat dysmorphia, which is almost like a form of body dysmorphic disorder, where you would focus on wanting to change certain elements of your body as a form of anxiety towards that body part. So for me, I think we've seen potentially a huge impact come from image-based social media onto the way that young people perceive either how they should live their life or how they should look.
I'm going to sound like a very sad old middle-aged man now, okay? Because well, what I'm thinking is that this has always existed. You know, you would have had people wanting to look like Marilyn Monroe at one point. You know, so I can understand the aspiration to want to look like someone famous, whatever it may be, but there seems to be an aspiration for a look which isn't natural, which is fake in the first place. Does that make sense? So like a desire to have lips which wouldn't be a natural look for lips in the first place, or a bum which wouldn't be a natural shape for a bum anyway. That's what I find quite difficult to get my head around, the desire for a look which is, well, I can't think of a better word, which is fake. Yeah, absolutely. And it's I know the ideal or quote unquote ideal body type has changed over the years, hasn't it? So if we look at the early 2000s, it was the likes of Kate Moss that people wanted to look like. So very slim, smaller eyebrows, very petite, no curves. But then as we move further through the
2000s, it was the likes of everyone wanted the J.Lo bum or the Kim Kardashian curves. But like you say, for example, the Kardashians being a huge influence over young women's urge to change their body shapes and how they appear, a lot of their attributes are so overly emphasized that they are almost, like you say, they do look fake. Or it could be a case of some people might just say that they look unrealistic. They're not real body types, which I do think, in my opinion, and I know that obviously I'm not wholly against cosmetic surgery and beauty treatments that make people feel better and more confident in themselves. I'm all about empowerment.
Yeah.
But for my personal opinion, it can be problematic to be promoting these types of surgeries and beauty treatments, because sometimes they are irreversible, or sometimes they could even be quite dangerous.
Yeah.
If you don't do your research of what surgeon you're going to see, or what, now that a beauty therapist can give you fillers or Botox instead of it being a health nurse, to me that could potentially be quite problematic and dangerous.
Yes, and also I suppose in relation to that is the not being able to stop. So if there was one thing that you really disliked about yourself, you always wanted to have a nose job, for example, that's very different from wanting the nose done and then wanting the lips done and then your ears pinned back and then a hair transplant. And do you know what I mean? When it goes on and on, that seems very different from an individual thing that you might like to change about yourself.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's very much context based. But like you quite rightly pointed out, and I don't know the statistics around this or the evidence base for this, but for people I've spoken to who have had cosmetic surgery or kind of beauty treatments related to filler, they do say that it's very much addictive. A bit like getting a tattoo. Some people would say tattoos is quite addictive. I know that I got my first tattoo when I was 17, and then every year since I've seen it as almost a tradition to get a new one. People I've had conversations with around the likes of lip filler, for example, once that starts to die down or you start to get used to your new look, you almost become desensitized to your new look, so you want more.
Yes.
And then, like you say, it becomes bigger and more emphasized and potentially could become dangerous. So it is context based, but although again, like I say, I don't have the evidence base behind it, there are studies to suggest that the statistics of this rise in plastic surgery and this rise in certain beauty treatments has fallen in line with the rise of social media.
Yes, I'm sure it has.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
Does your research show that it's still predominantly affecting females over males? That's not to say that males are not increasingly concerned about appearance, but is it still predominantly a female thing?
So at the moment, I'm just coming into my data collection stage. So I'm just sort of organising interviews with participants. But from existing research, it predominantly emphasises women's struggles. And what I found quite interesting at the early recruitment stage of my research for like I say, for participants, I so far have a very female dominant cohort.
Yeah.
At this present moment, there are very few men or gender diverse individuals coming forward to just want to participate and discuss their experience, which I do think from when we always think of if we always think of body image or disordered eating, we do tend to think of females, although like you say, we do know that men also suffer with this. Yeah. I do also think in this transitionary period of being in a world where we're starting to understand gender diversity more, as well as equality in men and women's and gender diverse roles in society and their experiences. So we're starting to see men as potentially understanding men as victims now of certain abuse or certain certain crimes that we may not have understood them to be, say, 10, 15 years ago. We are understanding different gender identities and sex-based identities. It would be really interesting to have those conversations with people who identify as either gender diverse or identify as men, because we do predominantly hear from women and their experiences.
Yeah, so because I was just thinking, you mentioned about eating disorders. We do tend to think about eating disorders in relation to women, anorexia, bulimia, for example. But I did read something about, the number of young men that are kind of obsessed with putting in protein and eating their chicken and vegetables and working out of the gym too much, which is perhaps an eating disorder we don't think about quite as much, but is still on that spectrum. It's still on that scale.
Yeah, and that's an area that I want to touch on in conversation with those who engage in the research, because a huge area that I've started to look into during my PhD has been this term diet culture.
Yeah.
And like you say, someone who is counting their calories or counting their macros, so their protein, their carbs, their fats. But people who are counting that and want to hit a certain protein every day and they have to, for their own, what they'd say, their own sanity, they have to hit a certain workout regime every week. To me, although you might not identify as, like you say, having disordered eating patterns or a disordered relationship with food, you are engaging with diet culture in some way because you are planning your training and you're planning your nutrition to suit a certain goal.
Yes.
But like you say, if we're talking about a male context, men who engage in, say, bodybuilding or engage in just the gym and wanting to, like you say, have your protein shakes and eat chicken, rice and veg every day, they don't see that as engaging with diet culture because it's their lifestyle.
Going back to women, if it is predominantly more of a female thing, you'll know better than me, but I've read some really scary, shocking statistics in terms of sort of the age at which some females start to think about diets and food. We're talking about primary school age, already thinking about dieting, which is terrifying, really.
Yeah, I saw a study 2 or 3 days ago, and I can't for the life of me think of what committee it came from, but I'd seen it on social media actually shared, and it talked about an evidence base that showed that the average young girl in the UK that started to consider the way their body looked and started to consider dieting was around between the age of 6 and 7,
Oh, wow.
which to me is scary, because when I was 6 or 7, I was out in the street making mud pies and playing gymnastics. It wasn't something I considered. I grew up in quite a healthy family and quite a diet-orientated family. My parents were always doing the likes of the Atkins diet or Slimming World, but that was never instilled on myself and my brother. So to think of a young person as young as 6 or 7 thinking about what they eat and how they look, I think that would cause a massive amount of trauma from quite a young age. Yes.
I mean, like you said, there's a difference between, eating healthy, for example, but being obsessed with the appearance based. The article that I was reading about on that was saying about young females looking at pictures, taking up to 30 or 40 pictures before they select which one they think is suitable. And you might understand or expect that a little bit more within teenagers, but for that to be taking place for girls so young, that really is a worry.
Yeah, it is. And I think it is even at any age, isn't it? To think that you have to take 30 to 40 pictures of yourself before you feel like you look half decent. It's as if you have some kind of expectation or kind of level that you have to hit before you think you look acceptable to other people. And it's this online validation of wondering how many, if you're posting it online, how many likes you're going to get or who's going to see it and who's attention is it going to attract. It's quite I view it as an obsession in itself. Yes,
yeah, because the other thing that's really noticeable is that even if you were trying to not think about it or push yourself away from it, the constant targeting, if I use Instagram, for example, because I'm a male in his 40s, all the adverts I get are, for go to the gym, or how to lose your beer belly, or hair transplants, or just for men. Or, the advert is so targeted that it's constantly in your psyche anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you say, if it doesn't matter who you necessarily follow on there, because they have your demographic, certain adverts are automatically pushed to you. And I'd strongly, unless I maybe just didn't notice it before kind of COVID came around, I think it's gotten worse since COVID.
I think
I know for me, all I saw during the lockdown and after the lockdown is still continues to be posts around how to be your most productive self. And I'm like, well, actually, I'm a really busy person and I am quite productive, so I don't need that tip. Thank you very much. But because I'm in my mid to late 20s and I'm in that demographic as someone who might be seen as wanting to get involved in this sort of hustle culture of always working hard or always finding something else to do, that's the type of advert that's put forward to me, or the suggested person to follow.
So I wouldn't know, but if the average 18-year-old girl is using social media, does she get targeted adverts about diets or dieting pills or something like that?
I would imagine so. Again, I don't have the kind of statistics around that, but I know from, again, just kind of having conversations with people around my age and younger, it tends to be a case that there's so many more profiles on the likes of Instagram now that focus on what videos of what you eat in a day, videos of, like I say, your morning routine to have the best type of day, and a lot of this tends to be focused around training in the gym, or focused on the types of meals to prep to make sure that you stay on a plan, or that you're eating what they would say is properly or healthily or clean during the week. So a lot of it, even if you're not necessarily saying that you are following a fitness influencer online, a lot of larger profiles online that young people would be suggested to follow tend to follow some kind of fitness regime or have some kind of app or company that they engage with to give them meal preps or give them a training plan.
Can't escape it, can you? Because I was just saying, even if you're not on social media, I just had this morning on in the background, and Holly and Phil were doing exercises about how to not get so many bags under your eyes or lines on your forehead. And wouldn't it be lovely just to be allowed to age naturally? Wouldn't it be lovely if we were just allowed to age as we're supposed to?
Yeah, exactly. Rather than always striving to be a younger or less lined looking self.
Yeah, exactly. And any other findings from your research so far? I know you said it's kind of early days at the moment, but any other sort of things that have really struck you?
The only other thing I'm finding at the moment is I came into the research thinking that I sort of knew what trolling was like on social media, and what negative commentary was like on social media. And it wasn't until I was sort of a year or so into the research that I was quite naively introduced to the fact that there are gossip forums directly set up just for tearing influencers down or public profiles down. So a part of the research that I'm currently kind of engaging with is going through the likes of these gossip forums to see the types of conversations that are being had. And it's shocking. It's very, very derogatory. So there's a particular forum that I have looked at called Tattle Life. It's a public forum, it's a public website, it's known as a gossip chat room, that uses, they set up threads to talk about, say, Instagram influencers or celebrities and tear apart their lifestyle or tear apart their appearance. And that is totally what it's set up for. It's its sole purpose as a forum.
It doesn't surprise me, because that's kind of been part of culture even before, lots and lots of social media use. You had things like Heat magazine, which, just constant pictures of people who put on weight, lost weight, arrows pointing at them where they'd put on a bit of a bulge on their belly and so on. I wonder why, one, they make it, but also that there must be a market for it, because that sort of literature sells. People want to read about it. So, that would be their argument. They're just producing what they want other people to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, where previously you have had the likes of Heat magazine or Closer, or
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of other ones. My mum used to buy like OK magazine. you don't tend to see many people, although you do still have the magazine aisle in your supermarkets. You don't see half as many people setting up their monthly subscriptions for it to come through the door anymore, or people picking up their magazine with their food shop. So that market is definitely there, because let's face it, a lot of literature, whether it's literature, whether it's music, whether it's videos, movies, it's moving online, isn't it? Because it's far more accessible, it's far more easy, and it's cheaper to run.
Yeah.
So rather than having all your printing and manufacturing costs, you've got it on a forum that you just make a username for, and then tick a box to say that you agree to certain rules where you won't slate anyone who's not in the public eye, for example, and then you're there. You can search whoever you want to and talk about or read about whoever you want.
It's a bit depressing, isn't it, Lauren? It's a bit depressing.
Yeah, it makes you wonder where people get the time, doesn't it?
I know, yeah. I just wonder if we all have deep-rooted insecurities about our appearance because of the culture we live in, then one way to vent that is to sort of slag off other people, isn't it? I'm not saying that's right, but I wonder if that's where it comes from.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think, as like you say, as securities continue to grow in the 21st century, I can't see a time where we aren't going to be able to stop campaigning for the likes of this Be Kind. So we hear about kind of reality TV stars or the TV presenters like Caroline Flack, for example, where so many campaigners came out after that tragedy and said, we need to just be kind. We need to be kinder to one another. But unfortunately, like you say, when people are so deeply rooted in their insecurities and they're in almost a routine of being desensitized, and we've normalized this negative language towards people for so many years before social media, like you say, with newspapers or with magazines. It's not new. It's just a different type of way of tearing people down and talking about our insecurities, or should I say deflecting them onto other people. And I think we have this misconception that if someone chooses to share their life on television or on social media, for example, that they're no longer a human being and that they've chosen to live their life publicly, so they deserve everything that comes at them. And for me, I can't quite get my head around that.
No, it's the keyboard warrior thing, isn't it? That it is easy to say something behind the safety of your screen, certainly.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Lauren. That's really, really interesting chat. And it's something that, in particular, I think a lot of young people would be very interested in listening to about social media. Probably things they're already aware of, but I think it's definitely things that need highlighting as well. Did you want to give out any more details at all, Lauren? People can add you on Twitter, for example?
Yeah, so my Twitter handle is Lauren Doyle, but it has a 4 in the Lauren instead of an A, and a 0 in the Doyle instead of an O. I regularly try and engage with Twitter. I didn't use Twitter for quite a long time until I came in academia. So I try and engage with Twitter, whether it's to talk about projects I'm working on, sessions I'm running, or even people who want to come and have a conversation with me about my research or participate in research as well. I'm always looking for more people to talk to and to talk about this too.
Brilliant, thank you. And will you come back on when you're getting a bit further down the line with it as well?
Yes, absolutely, I'd love to.
Come back on as Dr. Lauren Doyle. That would be fantastic.
Yes, that would be wonderful.
Thank you very much for your time today, Lauren. Really do appreciate the chat.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the sociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.